My name is, I go by initials AGK Karunakaran. I'm the president of Thai Silicon Valley, or in other words, volunteer in chief. Thanks again for signing up and listening to or getting ready to listen to our MyStory session today. We've been continuing through various programs at Thai Silicon Valley. We just finished our startup summit. And as we are planning out, I call it phygital events going forward, because slowly people are coming out of pandemic, and we expect to have more in-person events also as the year rolls around. So again, welcome everyone. So I would like to introduce our champion who's been driving the MyStory session all along, Naveen Bisht. He's a founder of Akitra. It's a cyber security and a compliance automation company. And he's been a serial entrepreneur. He's been involved with multiple startups. He was a founder of Starks, SecureAct, Nina Networks, Ukia Software, which is acquired by Novell. And he's been a past board member of TAI, and he's chaired multiple programs. But the MyStory session, he has been doing this since 2011. So, thank you, Naveen, for doing this and carrying the TAI torch with this particular program. Listening to, entrepreneur story, we get to learn a lot. And I appreciate you championing that. Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you, AGK. Thank you so much. Glad to see you here today. Since last month you were not there in the MyStory. Good evening and morning. Morning to the folks who are joining from other parts of the world where it's morning, and of course to folks who are here in the West Coast in the western part. Good evening. So a couple of housekeeping items. Number one is please start writing your questions in the Q&A part of this your screen. And so after our amazing speaker today does her sharing her story first in her own way, then we'll get into the Q&A, and we'll try to cover all your questions that you may want to ask her. So one of the subject in this whole, I call it in the new technology world, is something around consumer identity management, which I'm sure every day you hear about it. So the question is, how do you create a mission around democratizing consumer identity management in the face of formidable dominance of big tech and massively scaled consumer platforms like Facebook and Google? So in order to democratize this capability so that the broader internet economy can deliver optimal experiences to consumers and customers, Kamakshi Sivaramakrishnan founded Drawbridge in 2011. So leveraging large-scale artificial intelligence and machine learning to build largest scale independent identity graph. And the company was acquired by LinkedIn, a Microsoft company a few years ago. And Drawbridge solutions enable new ways to intersect the consumer purchase journey to identify a person's digital presence, anticipate their needs and intentions, and deliver appropriate messages, all in an efficient and privacy-friendly manner. Prior to founding Drawbridge, Kamakshi was a senior research scientist at AdMob, a mobile advertising firm which was acquired by Google in 2010. She also currently serves as a director of iHeartMedia, which is a publicly listed company on NASDAQ, and is a member of the board of overseers of Boston University. She has received a number of awards. So if I start talking about it, probably I'll take her whole time to share her story, but I will include some of them. She was Forbes America's top 50 women in tech in 2018, one of San Francisco Business Times most admired CEOs in 2016, and many, many others. She holds a Master of Science in Electrical Engineering from Boston University and PhD in Electrical Engineering, Information Theory, and Algorithms from Stanford University. So with that, without taking too much of thrill out of Kamakshi's story, I would like to hand it over to Kamakshi to share her exciting, colorful, and amazing entrepreneurial and professional journey with us this evening. So let's give her a big round of virtual applause. So with that, Kamakshi, all to you.
Well, thank you so much, Naveen. That was quite a stellar introduction and really something that hopefully I live up to the to sort of the platform that you've given me to share my story. Before I do that, I just wanted to kind of set a little bit of stage and context for the audience. A lot of us sit in so many of these presentations and talks that we have heard from so many entrepreneurs, right? So I wanted to try something different in the way I kind of talked about my story here. I wanted to kind of send a message or kind of hopefully give a message through the story, which is the story of possibilities, in the sense that my story and my journey thus far is truly an expression of how it has been possible for me, who has had quite an average upbringing, an average background, who came from a fairly kind of, middle class to lower middle class family back in India. And a lot of things have opportunities and possibilities happen to me. My hope here is through this story, which is probably said a little unconventionally, the takeaway for all of you is that it is possible for you too. There is very little that is so unique and so distinctive about any one of us that makes it only possible for some of us. So my hope here is that more than an inspiration, this is more a story of possibilities, in the sense that, as I said, if it is possible for me, it's possible for everyone as well. So with that said, I also kind of want to remind everyone that I'll be saying the story a little bit differently, unconventionally. Pretty much every talk of mine has been about, the core commercial business entrepreneurship aspects of kind of my journey thus far. Very little has been about kind of the story, the person behind it who made this possible and the circumstances under which this was possible. So I think today I'm going to cover more of that. That's sort of the unconventional piece. So with that said, I'll just share my screen here, and then it'll be a story shared through kind of pictures. I was sharing this with Naveen and Vishali a little while back, that through the process of putting together some of these slides for this presentation talk, actually so much of my life flashed in front of me. So it's been kind of a real thrill for me to put this presentation together and share the story with all of you. So I'll kick this off with kind of my favorite picture, which is effectively the first recollection of me as kind of in my life on this planet. This is a picture of the baby me with my mother. And given this picture, it probably dates me. I was obviously born at a time when it was black and white photography back in India. This was in the late 70s when I was born. And my mother, wow, it almost brought a tear to my heart when I saw this picture, because my mother has obviously aged quite a bit. And this just reminded me of how young and beautiful she was at the time. And certainly she still is beautiful in every way. But it was, and it also kind of, I'm a relatively newer mom myself. This kind of reminded me of my daughter as well. She is such a splitting image of myself. So this is both an homage and an admiration to my mother, who has effectively made a lot of what I am today possible. So I was born in India, in Bombay. And in a nuclear family, my mom was a homemaker, is a homemaker. My dad, who is no more, was a public company servant. My mother, my sister was, she is, a commerce graduate. So we are a family of 4, 2 sisters, a mom and dad, and any average sort of family that you might take all over the world, but certainly in India as well. Given my father was an employee in a public company, we had the classical sort of, middle class family upbringing. I consider myself through the process of entrepreneurship, right? Every CEO, every founder is the face of the company. You're always in the limelight and in the spotlight. You almost seek it because you are the face of the company. This picture reminded me that I was always not the same. This is me when I was probably like 8 years old or so. The sort of the person that is circled who is speaking from the background, not even on the front row, middle, center. That's not where I'm sitting. I'm somewhere in the back area, and I'm just kind of sneaking and peeking out to be seen in the photograph. So that kind of also reminded me that as one doesn't have to be a certain stereotypical personality to be a successful founder or a CEO. All of us have our own sort of journey of evolution on how we kind of grow up to be the person that we want to be, and we define the flavor of the founder and the CEO that we are. It also reminded me that I don't need to kind of have a certain construct for my own child as well, that she has to be a certain way. I think giving children a chance to kind of explore, discover, and a loving environment is probably first and foremost. And each of us evolves and discovers ourselves to be who we are. Anyway, not to get too preachy, but this kind of reminded me that, I've never been the center stage person who was, who had a command of the stage or the people or the audience, etc. And this kind of gave me some assurance that, it reminded me, as I said, of how I would like to kind of give my daughter all the chances and opportunities. But, children and people will figure their way out as they grow. And this kind of gives you a sense of my school and academic upbringing was, again, obviously I grew up in Bombay in India. I was kind of academically oriented, I guess, not because I was sort of forced into it one way or another. I kind of like numbers. I kind of like math. I had sort of deeply kind of South Indian cultural context because that was the family that I was born into. I think I liked getting awards. Maybe somewhere along the way, I liked kind of the center stage. So that just gives you a sense of how kind of my school career, etc., evolved. It actually helped me benchmark when I'll compare this for you guys in a few slides when I kind of get my PhD, during my PhD convocation ceremony, how kind of, the same person getting an award many, many years later, how does that kind of look like? It was kind of an interesting comparison for me. I just wanted to say that even though I was very academically oriented and kind of very much into math, numbers, I think that kind of gave a sense of maybe not a surprise as to why I got into engineering. But I've never believed in this whole left brain, right brain, kind of you're only one type or the other. For example, I'm into art. Like these are like, snapshots of like pictures of what I've painted. I play an Indian classical instrument. I think that kind of made me more of a lateral thinker, probably in ways that I did not design it to be that way, or my parents didn't design it to be that way. But I think it kind of gave me the opportunity to have perspective in ways that probably would haven't happened if I had kind of chosen to be kind of a one-trick pony of a certain type. So that kind of goes back to this point that I am not quite a subscriber of your one type, left or right brain type. I think there are individuals, personalities. It's very circumstantial. I'm very much of a nurture versus a nature person. So I think circumstances kind of gave me an opportunity to kind of really dabble in practices, in forms of art outside of sort of, academic pursuits as well. And that, before I kind of talk a little bit about this, that kind of gave me kind of my journey into getting my engineering degree. For those of you who are from Bombay, I graduated from BJTI, one of the premier institutes in Bombay. I got my undergraduate degree in electrical and electronics engineering. I came to Boston University under a graduate fellowship. This is way back in the late 90s, in 98, 99 is when I came to Boston University. And I came to get my master's there at BU. And this kind of reminded me, this picture that you guys see on the right is this hideous jacket. I would never be caught dead in that jacket again. but that was my first exposure to that much cold coming from Bombay to Boston. That was quite a shock to my system in terms of, the temperature differential during the winters. Not only was that, I grew up in India at a time where unlimited, I don't know, soft drinks, etc. I never grew up at that time. We didn't have the kind of mall economy that exists in India, etc. So a lot of this was kind of first time for me. It was kind of an interesting experience coming into sort of the US and certainly coming into Boston University. It really shaped me in a big way because I got my master's in a field called digital signal processing. That's kind of the area that I focused on. I was supposed to stay back for a PhD at BU at Boston University, but I think there was the maverick in me that was like, all right, maybe I do want to experience what does sort of the work professional industry world looks like. So after 2 years of my master's, I actually did not stay back for the PhD program and instead went into the industry. It was sort of the pre-dot-com times. This was in 2000. And I spent about 8 or 9 months in the industry. And within 6 months, I knew that it was a mistake. I needed to go back to academia. I really missed it. And that I probably needed to get back to something that was more fulfilling for me than sort of digital signal processing. So I applied for PhD programs, et cetera, at multiple places. And I got into Stanford and I got my PhD at Stanford. But I moved from signal processing to a more theoretical field called information theory. For those of you who may not be aware, information theory is like applied mathematics for engineers. It effectively solves a number of algorithm design for compression, channel source coding, prediction, filtering of signals, etc. It's algorithm design improving optimality. So it's very mathematical, primarily discrete mathematical. So that was quite an experience for me from BU to Stanford. And Stanford is a highly competitive environment. I think even at that time, without really knowing this, I was comfortable in putting myself in uncomfortable positions. And I was ready for the challenge. And in some way, I think I worried less about the failure that gave me a chance to experiment. And again, this is where I kind of go back to my mother, the picture that I started with. While she did instill me the fear of failure, she was also quite kind of instrumental in instilling values in me about to not be worried so much about the failure. So as a result of which, I think it gave me a chance to put myself in opportunities and possibilities, again, going back to the story of possibilities. So after BU, as I said, I spent a little bit of time in the industry, less than a year. I came back to Stanford pretty much the next year for my PhD. 7 years later, I got my PhD at Stanford. And again, this dates me. This is, as you guys can probably see, this is way back in 2007. I defended my thesis. And I told you guys a few minutes back, this is me getting my PhD degree during the convocation. And this picture versus this, that was quite a remarkable change in me. So I was just kind of myself noting the change as I was putting these slides and pictures together. Again, and sort of, speaking about possibilities, is it possible for sort of a girl who grew up in Bombay in a middle class, lower middle class family? There was nothing very special, premium or supreme about my family. It was me putting myself in positions, fearing less about the potential for failure. And along the way, you roll the die enough number of times, you do kind of have success come your way. I think I practiced that a lot in my entrepreneurship as well. That really baked into my appetite for risk. So that's, I think, I thought to myself now, even more than a decade later, when I think back about this, I'm like, wow, this like little kid who grew up in Bombay, in this sort of nondescript part of the city, in a nondescript family that looks like every other family in India. Is that possible? Yes, it is possible. So my story, my kind of reminder to you guys is, if it is possible for me, it's certainly possible for you too. Along the way, I met my husband. It's kind of, I talk about, for me, marriage to him has been a story of partnership and a story of witness to my life. In many ways, he has been tremendously influential in kind of being the support system for me, because entrepreneurship has a very, very, very high fixed cost. When you think about kind of all the personal sacrifices and the personal sort of commitment that it takes to found a company from nothing, starting from a blank slate to kind of building it up to scale, especially when you think about very ambitious, highly visionary problems in marketplaces that are highly competitive, etc. There's a lot, like we all are aware of what it takes. So I dedicate sort of this minute to kind of my partnership with him that made many of kind of my personal professional success possible. As I told you, I want to kind of step away from say the story differently as a story of possibilities. So I don't want to talk a whole lot about kind of Drawbridge or sort of, the business aspects of it. Obviously, as you guys have questions, I'm more than happy to answer them. But as in my part of the coverage, I just wanted to talk about sort of the story behind the person. But this was only one slide. The reason I put up the slide is, as I was kind of meeting with Jeff Weiner and some of the senior leadership team members at Microsoft as well during the sale of my company to LinkedIn and Microsoft, they'd asked me to put together a slide that introduced myself to the senior leadership team, that is Satya's team at Microsoft, and also certainly Jeff Weiner and his team within LinkedIn as well. So this is just kind of reminded me, again, as I said, I was just putting together a few things in my sort of life, and I was like, oh, that's kind of interesting. A couple of years back, this is what I had to put together to kind of share the background, my story, etc. As kind of it's a lot about sort of, when companies are acquired and bought, it's as much the talent as it is the business and the opportunity in the market itself. There's a lot that rides, at least in certain acquisition scenarios, around the founder themselves and the founders themselves. So that was part of kind of the evaluation of the founder's background too. But I'll just spend a minute or two along the way, somewhere between sort of, my PhD and this point. Effectively, I am a product of entrepreneurship only. Even after my PhD, I did not make a choice to go to sort of the proverbial corporate environment. I, in fact, made a choice to again go to a highly nondescript company at the time. It was a company called AdMob. It was in the mobile marketing and advertising space. So think of way back in 2008, when we were primarily feature phones. Those were those flip phone devices. You used to get these scary messages at that time. For those of you who are old enough to remember that time, internet was expensive. It used to be charged on a per minute basis. You would get these scary messages saying, are you sure you want to open up your browser? You're going to be charged, I don't know, $1.99 per minute. But there was a thriving web economy building around sort of, mobile consumption. So AdMob was a company that was looking to create monetization models for publishers and content providers who are publishing content and making experiences available in mobile. And that journey was revolutionized when the first generation of iOS and iPhone devices effectively came into bear, because they made the experience obviously so much more richer. And of course, for rest of us, we know the rest is history. But AdMob capitalized it by being the company at the right time. So it became sort of the monetization solution from an advertising marketing perspective for all app developers who are developing sort of applications in the iOS ecosystem. And that turned out to be a raging success. Google acquired the company. It was the third largest acquisition Google made at the time. Google's mobile ads business is AdMob today. So I was a part of the very early team, about 15 or so of us who were present in the company at the time when I joined it. So I got front seat experience, not being the driver, but passenger seat experience of what it takes to kind of build a company, scale a company, product, sales, commercial, business development, a lot of dynamics about company building. What did I know? I was a PhD student at Stanford. I did not have any commercially viable sort of thesis. My thesis was very theoretical in nature. Remember, I said information theory was a theoretical discipline. So it was kind of interesting to learn entrepreneurship by not necessarily founding the company, being a part of the very early team, having the experience close close enough. That really prepared me very well for sort of what Drawbridge was going to be, which is the company that I founded after Google, AdMob exited to Google. I spent about 7 months or so at Google. A lot of us left soon after to start a number of our own companies. That's why AdMob is like the PayPal mafia. A lot of us were mobsters who went ahead and started our own companies as founders ourselves. And that's certainly what I did with Drawbridge. I started Drawbridge in 2011. And that was kind of a continuation, and in some ways a continuation, in some ways sort of a newer product idea, again, in the broader space of, marketing technology. And as Naveen introduced, the product that we built was around consumer identity solutions, and a very hard problem to solve. Think about this. If you and I as consumers with our average consumer experience, we log on to Google, we log on to Facebook, we authenticate ourselves, we provide our identity. And of course, we all know very well, we provide so much data about ourselves, which gets harnessed and monetized by these sort of large tech players. That kind of identity is an incredibly valuable currency that every brand, every enterprise is looking to establish, but doesn't have it at the scale of what Google and Facebook have it. And that is at the heart of a number of consumer experiences, a number of enterprise experiences. So Drawbridge was building basically a data as a service business on consumer and enterprise experiences, but anchored around identity. And we were learning identity through a number of behavioral patterns. So it was a highly complex machine learning problem. We were doing machine learning on graphs. So in many ways, it was very satisfying for me because it was a technology problem, a science problem, but it was in the field of marketing tech as well. And through this process, I actually built and founded the company. We grew it to over close to 40 million of ARR that we built the business to be. And there was a kind of a moment in time when Microsoft and LinkedIn both were customers of ours. The conversation in classical sort of acquisition sort of scenarios where business development leads to corporate development, we were good partners, and they were like, look, we would like to actually have more strategic presence of your assets within the company. How about we can talk about the deeper opportunity? One thing led to another. It was kind of marriage made in heaven. We made the decision. It worked out well for investors, for my team, for a lot of us involved in building the company. My biggest kind of, sense of pride here is we made over 15, 20 millionaires in the company who were all employees. For me, that's the pride. When somebody writes to me and says, they've stashed away so much in college fund, they've paid off their houses, they bought like houses for their families, or they kind of had their best favorite nonprofit initiative that they funded. I think that makes me tremendously proud and happy that those aspects of the company building makes me in some ways happier than sort of the product and the business aspects as well. So it has been obviously a very fulfilling journey for me. I just wanted to show this other kind of, entrepreneurship in many ways has only the success stories get written, right? We don't hear as much about the failures. And also even the success stories, the gory details are never kind of shown on screen. I just wanted to make an attempt to show some of that. While on the right side was kind of a, party of celebration of Drawbridge into LinkedIn and Microsoft, etc. On the left side, this picture was taken at 5:22 a.m. when the certificate of incorporation was filed with the Delaware state, when the the deal actually closed. And it had to be done before 9 a.m. EST, obviously Delaware. So it had to be done before 6 a.m. PST. And this picture was taken at 5:22 a.m. My daughter was at that time 5 months old. And I did do this entire transaction as I was delivering and like literally postpartum with my child. So I thought this was really capturing of the moment. This was at 5:22 in the morning. Obviously, she's wide awake. And I had been through a night full of a number of closing diligence items, etc. Exhausted, but we closed the deal that morning. Again, kind of a story of possibilities, coming back to that kind of undercurrent. There is kind of no one way in which the story of entrepreneurship is written. It is the story of founders, their grit, their acumen, their determination, their perseverance to make things happen. It is a story of sort of the human spirit in many ways for me. And it's not always sexy. It's not always sort of top right, like all the charts that we like to see. There are lots of, bumps along the way, the famous sort of, pivots that happen along the way. And there are lots of, scary times along the way. And sort of parts of the unsexy pictures are also things that happen on the left here. But my child, she's obviously such a supportive 5-month-old. She was like there with me as I was closing the deal. I also wanted to kind of, talk about sort of the post-entrepreneurship thing. A lot of us, like pandemic has been kind of, a soul-searching exercise for many of us. A lot of us obviously got to spend times with our families that none of us would have done had the pandemic not forced us to do. Many of us acquired new hobbies, new interests, and I am certainly one among all of you as well. I acquired a new interest in hobby. I had never baked in the 40 plus years in my life, never. I had never cooked with a level of sort of, fervor and passion that I had, that I've been doing in the last, I don't know how many, but last year, some months that I did. I thought to myself as well, entrepreneurship, I like to be in control. I like to kind of, do a lot of things that like, being the boss and the founder, etc. So when you get acquired by large companies, it can be unsettling. Like, Satya is the boss, Jeff Weiner and Ryan Rosransky, they're the bosses of like LinkedIn, Microsoft. So I'm not running the show. I'm a part of sort of the machinery. So founders take some time to settle into kind of this new reality. And I think that journey has also been very educational for me, like having like front row visibility into how like CEOs of a 2 trillion plus company, how do they conduct operations? How do they conduct their leadership meetings? Seeing Satya in action in so many meetings has been immensely kind of, educational for me, immensely informative for me. The next company I found, the next time I do this again, I think I'll be a better leader for that. And through the way, I also tried to kind of use the time to kind of fill in some of the other aspects, experience other parts of, things that I've not had experience on. Speaking of it, some of the, experiments in cooking and baking that I've done, as I told you, I'd never done any of these things. I baked a cake for my daughter for her 2nd birthday. I'd never made a modak in my life, never. And this is like the first time I did this year. Have never baked a pie or a muffin or never made chaat. And these were all sort of the experiments that I got to. And anyway, I feel like I'm a fuller person now because of some of these experiences. And certainly again, it kind of the journey of possibilities, the story of possibilities. I think if you're open to experiences in life, it presents you with many interesting possibilities. With that, I just wanted to say that today, kind of, the person I started with, this child that I started the presentation with, is today grown up, and certainly with this other human being who, I don't know if you guys agree with me, there are many ways in which she's a splitting image of myself from when I was younger, and an inspiration for me to be a better human being as I'm a better founder in the future. More importantly, I did want to say that I think I would like to continue the story of possibilities for my child. And she's very privileged to have that. I would like to take that in many ways for other girls and other children who probably do not have that position of privilege, who don't have a life that gives them that opportunity. And I think all of us have an entrepreneur in ourselves. It's a matter of possibility and opportunity that presents itself. So if I can do that to somebody other than my child, who I'm duty bound to do, I think I would consider that to be very fulfilling. So that's kind of my story. As I said, hopefully this was kind of interesting to you. And my takeaway here is, my hope here is, your takeaway is, if an average girl growing up in an average family, in an average part of the country, with an average life can do this, any one of you can do this too. So thank you, Naveen. Hopefully this covered it, and I was on time. I don't know if I was. 6 minutes over, I think.
No, this was awesome. So we can, I think, hide the presentation. Thank you so much, Kamakshi. This was awesome. Beautiful story, amazing. And thank you again for sharing. So what we'll do is, I'll start off with the first question, now more on your entrepreneurship side of the other left brain, or I guess whatever the brain. So my question is basically, I mean, even though you've kind of touched in some ways, but when you were growing up, like, as a child, right? Obviously, you kind of covered the story. Did it ever, was there anything, if you look back and reflect, that inspired you that you wanted to become an entrepreneur?
I think it's an interesting question, because this question was asked to me, obviously, like, being the founder, you're the face of the company, as we all know, many of us know. I had a lot of media presence, and in one of the interviews a few years back, someone asked me this question, and as I was answering the question impromptu, I said that I'm an accidental entrepreneur. I'm not someone who kind of designed myself, my career, etc. to be. In fact, my PhD thesis was anything but for entrepreneurship. It was super theoretical. It was super academic. I actually had tenure track positions kind of ready, lined up for me in academia. I was not supposed to be in anything that was related to the B of business. So I'm an accidental entrepreneur. I think this, again, my only thing here is kind of being open to opportunities and possibilities and presenting, kind of being open-minded about it. And maybe the one thing that kind of guided me, that made me open to this, was I like to I have a certain thing to kind of want to design my outcomes. Some might call it control. I'm not quite sure that is exactly what it is. That probably guided me towards kind of wanting to discover. That's what got me to PhD. That's what got me to entrepreneurship, etc. So the desire to want to design problems, design the outcomes, is probably what guided me, rather than wanting to be an entrepreneur from the very get-go. In fact, I come from an average family. Remember, nobody was an entrepreneur in my family of record.
No, thank you so much. So let me start with the second question from the audience. So from someone, Sharlik Shah. Actually, I think you kind of answered his question also, but again, you can elaborate more. How did you venture into entrepreneurship journey? How did you know this is the right path for you or not? If you want to add something more to what you already said, I guess.
Yeah, I'd say that I stumbled into entrepreneurship, right? To your point, Naveen, that's kind of the accidental entrepreneur. I met kind of a very interesting founder of this company, AdMob. And at the time, I had academic tenure track positions ahead of me. I had offers from a number of hedge funds, prop trading, large investment banks, of course, Google as well. I think the fearlessness of, by the way, guys, just to give you a sense, AdMob was 12-person company. This was in 2008. They hadn't even sponsored an H1B for anybody at that time. So kind of, going through this risk, but having the freedom to design kind of, algorithms for a problem that I did not know much about, which is kind of user behavior on mobile devices, was exciting and interesting enough for me. I didn't know much about entrepreneurship, but I could tell that if I put myself in this environment, I'm probably likely to learn. So the opportunity to learn is probably what kind of got me there, more than me kind of wanting to be an entrepreneur. In that sense, it's a happy coincidence that I got to experience it. And I would say rest is kind of what the life I'm living right now.
That's awesome. Thank you, Kamakshi. So second question is from Uday Gokarn. Can you share an experience where you came close to giving up on your company?
I wouldn't say I came close to giving up on the company, but it was some really rough times, because with Drawbridge, we had two different business models. We had a SaaS enterprise model, and we had a service model as well. The service model of the business was, as many of you can imagine, it's a lower margin business. The SaaS model of the business was a higher margin business. And in many ways, the service model of the business was a means to the end for the SaaS model business. It was a means to the end because it served a data acquisition vehicle for us. So a few years into the company, we divested out of that business. And divesting out of that business effectively meant that we ended up resizing the company in terms of people. So there were a few people who had to be laid off, etc. So the whole restructuring exercise of the business, the organization, the strategy, the people, human elements, etc., were extremely challenging for me to deal with. It was not something that A, I had experience doing, B, we didn't have like an army of consultants who came in and dealt with all of these things. We were a 250-person company, so we were dealing with all of these things ourselves, and I was frontline with all of these things. So they were very challenging times from the strategy of the company. I would quote my board member, Jim Getz from Sequoia. He said it was kind of burning of the boat moment, right? You know, like in kind of, there was in World War and a number of, there's this theory that once you burn the boats, there is no returning back. That it was a one-way exit out of that strategy that we made. So it was pretty kind of nerve-wracking to strategically execute it, singularly execute on a business strategy going forward. The business that we divested from was a kind of a nice cash flow as well. We were walking away from all of that because it strategically made sense to go toward the higher margin SaaS model of our business. So I didn't feel like giving up, but the challenges were heavy and hard and tough, and they bore heavy on my conscience, on myself, on my emotions, and my ability as well. But we emerged out successful.
Yeah, it's like, I mean, I can imagine it would be very emotional. It's like almost like having twins and you have to give up one of them, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Kind of business, especially the one which is already which is ahead of the other business and feeding
Exactly.
you guys. I mean,
Exactly.
at least giving you hope of stability. Awesome. Okay, next question is from George Abraham. Compare your growth in India versus US. So I'm not clear on that question. Unless you understand it, please feel free to elaborate. I'm guessing more from personal growth.
I guess so. That's what I was thinking, because I never worked in India. Neither we didn't have an office or a business or a market presence in India.
Yeah.
So I'll answer the question as a personal growth. Hopefully I got the question right, from George. And if there's any way for you to indicate the same, please feel free to do so. My growth, the slope of my growth curve is much steeper here in the US than it's in India. In India, it was a kind of a gradual experience. It was somewhat of kind of a very organic experience. Nothing was necessarily kind of the hardest problems that I was undertaking. The hardest problem was I took IIT entrance, and I didn't make the cut. That was probably one of the harder things I did. But in the US, I think for example, I would say that, coming to Stanford, the first time you get into a highly competitive environment at Stanford with the best of the best from all over the world, and the PhD qualifying exams is kind of the first time you get to see the best of the IIT rankers also that you're sort of, competing with. So the growth, I was forced into much higher sort of growth curve environments, and I had to like really be ahead of my ambitions so that I could kind of have a fair shot at achieving them. So I would say I certainly grew up much more here in the US than in India. And while India laid the foundation, US gave me the opportunity.
Awesome. Next question is from Ram. How did you go about funding for Drawbridge? Did you bootstrap it? How did you convince VCs to invest?
Actually, so I was among the fortunate few who I was venture backed from day one, because the company that I was building, if you guys caught the drift of what I was saying, we were an enterprise product. We had some heavy machine learning tech, etc., that we had to build. It was a hard, like, consumer products are relatively easier to bootstrap. Enterprise products are harder to bootstrap. So we had venture capital dollars pretty much from day one. And the AdMob success positioned me well. So when I was leaving Google to go ahead and start this company, there was a lot of the AdMob stardust around me. It was a highly successful company. So when I was back out in market saying that with my idea for my company, I went back to pretty much the same investors that had invested in AdMob. And given sort of how instrumental I was in sort of the AdMob success, they were only sort of very keen to invest in my company. So, things aligned well in that sense that I went to a warm pool of investors, given kind of my experience with AdMob. So that's kind of specifically in my case. I also wanted to say that in the last few years, we've all heard from many women entrepreneurs and founders about sort of the horror stories of, fundraising, financing, and what their experiences in venture capital has been. Again, I would say I've been very fortunate in many ways that I've had none of those experiences. I've been in such a select group of highly professional, highly kind of supporting, very meritocratic set of investors who have only gone for sort of the best of what kind of the substantive value is rather than anything else. So I've been certainly a product of highly fortunate experiences there as well.
Thank you for sharing that. So next is a thank you from one of your great friends, Sushma. Great inspiring story, Kamakshi, even though I have known you for a number of years, but I learned a lot more about you. Thanks for sharing. And some other folks also,
Thank you,
Mishra, our
Sushma.
fearless.
For those of you, Sushma was the person I had never, sort of entrepreneurship, interesting experience, right? I had never even bought a house when I had to do commercial real estate for our team. And for those of you who know Sushma, she was highly instrumental in making sure that we made the right decision. Now we live in a work from home culture. We live in a very different work reality. Work location used to be defining of culture of a company. There were times where, and Sushma was hugely helpful in both guiding me and certainly helping us through the process as well.
Thank you. So next, also Vish Mishra, like I said, Thai, one of the co-founders and the fearless leader who's been president from times over, board member. He also is heartiest congratulations to you. Amazing story of possibilities. What's next for you?
I'm an entrepreneur by spirit, by mind, by body. So there is another company in me. I like to do it again. I like to start from scratch. I remember when I walked into the Kleiner Perkins office after I left Google, I had closed my seed round of financing. I just walked in with a laptop. And I remember my investor asking me, that's it? Like, who else with you? I was like, we'll figure this out. And we did. So I like to start from that blank slate, from nothing, and kind of building. And that's kind of gives me the thrill. So there is certainly another company there. I'd like to kind of broaden my horizon to kind of problem spaces that touch an average human being rather than marketing tech, which is kind of a 1% of a 1% problem. So I think healthcare as an industry seems very interesting and very enticing for me to learn, especially a lot of industries are getting disrupted by AI. Healthcare is, as an industry itself, is getting transformed with COVID, post-pandemic, et cetera, and AI is playing a big part in it. So I'm looking and trying to see and understand and learn more about what are the ways in which I can create and add value there.
Next question is from Raghunathan. He says, did your product focus change once you started Drawbridge? Number one. Number two is, were you eager to use your information theory or had a specific problem to solve in your mind? Also, please provide some insight into the challenges in building a team.
I would say that, so information theory was very helpful. The scientific and technical side of me was very helpful for me in the foundership because we were building technology AI products, right? So being aware of kind of the complexities of algorithm design, complexities of handling and managing data at scale, complexities of machine learning in terms of performance and especially performance at scale, a lot of sort of ML ops challenges, feature selection, supervised unsupervised learning. A lot of these things help me think from a product perspective more thoughtfully than had I just been kind of not as technically trained. Jokingly, I would say to my kind of CTO and others in my engineering team, you cannot bullshit your way with me. Like I am well calibrated on these things. So in that sense, it made me a better founder, a better CEO, better product manager. And a lot of us as founders and CEOs, we are the frontline. We are the chief sales officers. We are the chief revenue officers. Even when we have CROs, we are the ones who are there in the largest enterprise deals, etc. So it makes me very qualified. I could come across in a lot of these conversations from a customer perspective. You're solutioning with your customer rather than selling to your customer. And that is extremely critical in many ways from a trust building perspective. And your customers have to know that there is like, putting yourself in their shoes is extremely critical for product building, for customer success as well. So in that sense, I think it made me, I didn't actively use information theory. I was informed by it in the ways that I just listed. Hopefully that answered the question. If it didn't, please let me know. I'm happy to answer any specifics around it.
So next is from Venkat Rangan. Kamakshi, thanks for sharing your amazing story. I had a question on mentors. Do you have mentors that you feel shaped your business journey?
Actually, that's an excellent question, Venkat. I just wanted to say that I was literally speaking about this the other day to my husband and some of my friends. I never prioritized kind of getting a mentor, especially because, see, I got categorized as a technical founder. So, someone from a technical founder to a CEO and who survives multiple rounds of financing, because boards, the one thing they do is hire and fire CEOs. So as a result of that, one would have thought that, having kind of a business sort of mentor, kind of another entrepreneur as a mentor would be immensely valuable to me. Now, when I look back, I should have absolutely prioritized it. I did not do it. And as a result of which I do believe that I made more mistakes than probably what I could have. And I learned it the hard way. And now I'm at a point, after having gone through some of these experiences, I'm at a point where I look at them less as mentors. I want to hear more stories of experiences from other founders, especially founders, CEOs who have taken companies public, who have scaled companies. I want to learn different phases of foundership. Like I want to learn the 0 to 1. I want to learn from others' experience. I want to know the 1 to 10, and then I want to know the 10 to 100 as well. Speaking in log scale, I just want to know of these things, because each of these phases has ways in which I want to be informed by experiences. I mean, this is the point of history and experiences, right? You don't have to learn everything the hard way. You learn from others' experiences. So I've transformed my needs from mentorship to experiences. But there was a point in my time when I did need mentorship, and I probably didn't do as good a job of seeking mentorship and having a mentor who could have shaped me much more actively at that time.
So that's so next question is from Cervantes Lee, do you want to lead an academic research center now?
It's an interesting question. I did ask myself.
See, I told you you'll get a lot of amazing questions today.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I would say that I did think about it. That's why, I spend my time at this time. I'm currently with the Office of the CEO and CTO at Microsoft. I spend a bunch of time on sort of very forward-looking, innovative kind of super bleeding edge kind of investments that Microsoft makes in AI, etc. As a part of that, I'm very much, I work very closely with Microsoft Research, one of the last remaining industry research frontiers, if you may. So through that process, I did think about, academic research, but I think I like, customers. I like, scale. I like kind of building. I like experimentation. I think there are ways in which, and also given kind of the types of problems that we encounter today, AI arguably the gap between industry research and academic research is much shorter, smaller today. Arguably, industry is ahead of academia in many aspects of AI. So I am less compelled kind of with some of these things to kind of go back into academia as much as I feel to bring some of the best from a value system perspective to industry and just product building itself. And there's so many interesting problems in sort of, whether it is consumer, enterprise, industry space today, and especially when you, as I said, many problems of AI, industry is leading academia. And access to data, access to compute, doing that at scale, academic institutions still do lag behind. So and when you compose all of this with sort of, the customer building exercise, and I hate saying this, but in some ways, I like the process of, saleswomanship or salesmanship. Like, you have to be on the front line to get people to pay $1 for your product. There's a thrill in doing that. So I think it's a one way out for me. So academic research center is probably not.
Okay, let me ask the next question. So do you, there have been, a lot of changes in a lot of startups in the ad tech space, right? Going back, and there were some companies who went public, then they didn't, I know some of them without naming them, did very well with using machine learning, AI, I think, late, I would say 2010, 12, 13, that time period. They couldn't survive. And how did you manage to rise above the level, except obviously you divested some parts of thing and you refocused? Seems like you went through your own, very exciting as well as tumultuous journey, right? So that's one question, is how did you rise above the noise level? Second question would be, if someone wants to start today, especially there are only 2 or 3 these big, actually 4 or 5 of them, they are left right now. So how do you survive in that space, basically, if you're a startup and you want to start something new?
Insightful question, Naveen. I would say that, ad and marketing tech is it's a very mature industry. It's been around for 20 plus years, especially online advertising and marketing. So a lot of the efficiencies have been extracted out of the system through, technologies, intermediaries, point solutions, various different business models, etc. So as a result of that, it doesn't provide a lot of room for innovation today. And to your point, a lot of ad tech had been written off in post 2010, 11. It had been written off because, in addition to kind of the maturity of the industry, etc., the power was massively consolidating between Google and Facebook. There was the stat, and which is still very much true, 70 to 80 cents on every dollar of advertising is spent on Google and Facebook between search and social. So there is very little outside of these two platforms. But with the kind of, economy that we are living in, and with the kind of capital markets that we are in, ad tech has had a resurgence of sorts. For those of you who follow, the Trade Desk is an independent ad tech platform that is neither Google nor Facebook. It's a $45 billion company. It's, one of the best successes of independent platforms in ad tech. So certainly there's been a resurgence that has been led by broader economic conditions rather than ad tech itself. But I just wanted to give you a sense of the flavor of why some of that, it fell out of favor. And to your point, some of the companies that rose but didn't quite kind of survive. To your point of rising above the noise, we positioned ourselves more as an enterprise data as a service company. Our customers were very much in ad tech and marketing tech. So that's kind of the journey that we took. So we positioned ourselves to rise above the noise by saying, look, you can be an ad tech platform, you can be a martech platform, you can be, a content management system, you could be a security authentication company. All of you need for various kind of, AI modeling purposes, you need identity data so that you are able to offer better personalization, marketing, security, authentication services. So we positioned ourselves that way to rise above the noise, at least in the ad tech category. So that if we were another one of kind of, an ad platform without massive scale, it's very difficult to survive in that business at this time, as you rightfully pointed out. It's pretty much a game of, maybe it went with the capital markets and the economy being what it is, it went from 2 to, like, I don't know, 4, 5, 6, but it's still a highly consolidated market.
Okay, so we have 1 minute over the time. So a couple of questions. Do you have time for 2 more?
Sure.
Yes, sure. Okay, so last one question from Sanmeet Jolly is, where is Microsoft, LinkedIn, Bing leading in digital advertising to compete with Google, Facebook, duopoly?
I would answer this question more as sort of an individual perspective and less representative of sort of, the Microsoft platform at this time. I think Microsoft is such an enterprise tech company, a platform company. Cloud and Windows is sort of our expertise in ways that sort of Bing and Microsoft advertising products are absolutely an important part of our offering. But I think between the opportunity of Azure, the opportunity of obviously cloud with Azure, AI with Azure, and certainly ways in which the AI applications can scale beyond Azure and cloud, and certainly with sort of, how Windows as an operating system can continue to transform and evolve as there are more and more autonomous devices, and how that future would look. I think Microsoft will flourish more there than trying to kind of build another competing ad tech product to what sort of Google and Facebook have. And in many ways, again, this is my individual opinion, and thankfully so, right? It's such a higher purpose kind of mission that Microsoft has. In many ways, it is so enabling. It is enabling companies, businesses. It's enabling efficiencies in markets and digital economies. Advertising is always going to be there. We always need to advertise and market, but there are other ways to be very successful businesses. And I'm very proud of the fact that we are the most valuable company. This also reminds me of an interesting thing. When I got the term sheet from Microsoft, they said, here's the term sheet from the most valuable company on this planet. It keeps tossing between Microsoft and Apple. I'm glad that we are back into it.
Yeah, as of today, I mean, they're 2.5 trillion, and now Apple is 2.4, and then obviously Google 1.7 or 8, something like that. No, this is awesome. So the last question, looks like one more question popped up, so I'm going to take 2 more questions, then we'll let you go. Piyush Sharma, what is one mistake that, it's from Piyush Sharma, another entrepreneur. Actually, he'll be speaking next month, just sold his company within less than 2 years. What is one mistake that you will not repeat in your next startup, not related to tech or market?
I think only another founder can ask this question. Hi, Piyush. I would say that for me, I would say probably not one, maybe 2 mistakes. One is kind of, the investment and the level of kind of energy, time investment into acquiring talent, nurturing talent, retaining talent. Right. You are only as good as the sum of parts of your team. I think I was so caught up in sort of the product market fit as well, that while I would do this, I think making that almost a singular focus at very important stages and points in the company is something that I think I would do with much higher vigor in my sort of next company. And similar and yet related, and hence why I said 2 mistakes, is I also focused a lot on product market fit and kind of achieving that, scaling that, growing that. Equally important is sort of obviously the culture of the company and the team as well. Your customer success and employee success are highly correlated factors. So just like sort of team retention, acquisition, talent, etc., so is culture building, culture retention, culture acquisition, etc. It's extremely critical. So those are 2 things that I will absolutely singularly focus on at many stages of the company in my next company.
Well, second one looks like you kind of achieved. Seems like you got that award for being the most admired CEO for the by
It's an ever
by
moving
San
target,
Francisco.
right? There's always greater and greater
That's
scale.
true.
It's never done. It's a forever growing journey.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So the last question from me for the entrepreneurs actually in the attendance there would be, let's say if any entrepreneur today there who wants to start, do a startup in the ad tech marketing space. So, and where do you see in next 3 years, let's say, because I'm sure you're busy there with at LinkedIn, you won't do anything in next 2 years. So let's say, let's assume someone else wants to start today. What would you advise them in terms of the gap or the trends and opportunity if they want to start something, which could be huge in the next 3 to 4 years?
Look, I think my association with advertising and marketing tech is also evolving. I'm much more related to core AI technologies these days than necessarily marketing tech. But my advice would be, look, data is transforming every field, including that of marketing and advertising tech as well. The reason Google and Facebook are such dominant players is they have unique access to data. So
Right.
My advice to founders would be either unique business models around data services or creating business models enabled by unique data. In other words, if you cannot create a meaningful moat around access to data, ownership of data, services around data, then building any application in advertising and marketing tech is going to be an extremely challenging one. So focusing on that unique advantage around data is probably going to be the single largest indicator for success.
Well, that's really awesome. Thank you so much, Kamakshi. Really appreciate from your busy, hectic lifestyle. So right now I know, and I really appreciate very much, and we all on behalf of Thai and staff, so for taking your time out and sharing your amazing journey, and obviously the way you laid out the story of your growth as your story was awesome. So really, thank you so much. So we'll give you a big round of virtual applause. And for the folks who are in attendance, please note December 9th, we'll have another entrepreneur, Piyush Sharma, who had a company called Accurix within 2 years. Less than 2 years, they just got bought out by Tenable for 160 million, which is an amazing feat I think these guys did in a security space. So please make sure you register for that. So with that, we'll conclude today's Kamakshi. Thank you again, and we'll be in touch.
Thank you, everyone.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye.